to equally interesting topic, which is the data protection. So what I'll do is for next 35-40 minutes, I'll speak about the DPDP Act which has come through, and I'll try to explain what exactly this act is, what all it means for each of the financial services organization, and then we'll speak a little bit about the impact and then also the implementation path. And I think I love to keep it as interactive as possible. It's an evolving topic, and if you have questions, just feel free, you can ask during the session. Very happy if you want to hold the questions till the end of the session. I have with me my colleague Vivek Sarkale and Praveen Prabhu. They are both experts in privacy, and if I fail to handle any of the difficult questions, I'll pull them in. So with that, we can start. So this is our own India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, DPDP. It's quite a tongue twister. It took many years for this act to come through. And if you look at India as compared to other economies, every other country first becomes wealthy and then it becomes data rich. You look at US, UK, all other Western countries. In India, we first became data rich, and I hope we'll all become wealthy very soon. And because of so much proliferation of technology, it was very clear to the government that we need to protect our own kind when it comes to data and data security. And there were quite a few forces which were coming in. We all heard about how much the billions of transactions which are going to happen through the UPI handle, the amount of data which is there on the social media, amount of data which is collected by fintechs, the banks, with all the Olas, Ubers. This is the best age or the Amrit Kal of the Indian economy, specifically in the digital context. And the amount of data which we are generating, it's very clear that we couldn't have done without an act like this. So this act, we should always look at it with the core essence or core theme that this came to protect the people of India with respect to the data protection, give them their own data rights. And when we go through this session, always keep in mind that it is impossible to achieve data privacy without cybersecurity. So we'll split it into two sections. We'll talk about the act, and then we'll talk about the impact on the BFSI security. And GDPR was called mother of all regulations when it comes to data protection. And our own act, DPDP, I wouldn't say that it's comparable to GDPR, because they are both unique, they are both slightly different. But the scale, size, and impact of this act will be as humongous as the impact GDPR had on the overall market. So first is, what is the applicability of this act? So net, it's a digital. The first word is digital. That means that any data which we have digitized, it's applicable to that. So if you have records which are purely on paper, etc., this act will not cover. The second bit is it covers, there's a word personal in it, or personal data. So it covers the data which actually can identify a specific individual. So this act is applicable, it's not applicable to anything and everything. Only a data or a set of data attributes with which you can figure out the named individual behind those data attributes. That's where the applicability is. And it's applicable to principals residing on the territory of India. And if there is an outside agency, let's say some company in US, which is processing the data of India or of the principals residing in India, the act will be applicable to them also in some shape or the format, and I'll cover how. The second bit is, let's start with the non-compliance. So if somebody doesn't comply with this strong penalty, the penalty is around 250 crore rupees for an organization if they're non-compliant. Then there is another slab of 200 crore in case the companies which are collecting the data, they are not giving right notice to the data principals. And you as citizens of India, you also have an obligation. So if you don't disclose your data, etc. properly, there's a provision of 10,000 rupees penalty on data subjects or data principals. So there are six or seven aspects. Let me explain them gradually to you. So first is definition of personal data. So a lot of you are data experts, cyber experts, so I'll take some liberty of getting into some classification. So when you look at global regulations, you always hear a term called personally identifiable information, PII. Or you also hear a term called, some special information and terms like that. In this act, it's very simple, that it is personal data. So it's not getting into much more nuances of personal data, at least at this point of time. Second is notice. So let's take an example that I am a bank and I'm acquiring all of you as a customer of mine. And when I'm acquiring you, I'm going to collect your data. At the point of collection of data, this act requires that I need to give you a proper notice. The notice should be very clear, saying that I'm collecting your data. I need to specify that what I'm going to do with this data. I should also tell you that how and where I'm going to process this data. And the notice should be given to the data principals in a very clear format. I cannot throw a huge legal terms and conditions on you. It is not tenable because the government realizes that not everybody in India will understand a complex notice. It has to be simple. And then it can be given in any of those languages which are there in the 8th schedule of our constitution. The next is the consent. So if again as a bank, if I'm taking your data, I need your consent. Because right now today what's happening in India is that, I can take your data, process it, maybe send you marketing campaigns and do whatever with that. Your consent today just does not matter. But with this act coming in, it is very clear that I cannot touch your data without an explicit consent. And we were looking at the penalty, and it's very clear that if I'm breaching these topics of notice and consent, the penalty ranges from 200 to 250 crore. The next one is also in terms of consent, that you can give me a consent today that Prashant, take my data and process it to send me marketing campaigns. But that consent is not there with me forever, because you have a right to withdraw the consent. And if you come back and withdraw your consent, then I cannot be sending more campaigners or using your data, etc. Next one is children's data. So children in this case are people who are below 18 years. My son who's 15 doesn't agree. He thinks that after 15 they're no longer children. That's a different debate. And it says that if I have to use a child's data, I need to get the consent and give the notice to the parent or the guardian of that child. So it's called out very clearly. And also very interesting aspect, which some of us will like or may not like depending on which business we are in. We cannot analyze or track children's behavior online to run targeted marketing campaign or promotional campaigns on them. So for example, if there's a child playing or surfing YouTube, looking at a lot of websites or videos relating to some specific, let's say a toy. Today what happens is the agencies collect that information, and then the ads will start popping up about new toys to that child. This is banned now with this act. That's a very simple example, because a lot of companies, they take this children's tracking to an extreme level, because children are quite impressionable when it comes to the online campaigns. Then next is a transfer of personal data outside. So, so as per this act, when we have to so there's always a debate that can we send our data to any other country or not. So the government has made it clear that they will be maintaining something called a negative list. So for example, if a country, let's say like Pakistan, I'm just making it up, if they are in the negative list, then we cannot send the data to that specific jurisdiction. If US is not in the negative list, yes, we can send the data to a US. Please do remember that when we are sending data to any other country, any other geography, we need to put proper cyber security controls to protect that data. Then there is a very interesting thing called consent manager. That's where a lot of jobs will get generated, and I'll talk about more jobs which are going to get generated. So let's say again I'm a bank and I am going to get consent from all of you to use your data to do business with you, to give you credit cards, etc. So the law requires that I give a named person as a consent manager who you will interact with as a consent manager. Because to give a consent, who are you giving the consent to. If you have to withdraw your consent, you should know who I need to reach out in Prashant's bank to withdraw the consent. And this consent manager, I need to register this person with the privacy board. So there is a privacy board which is going to set up in the country. The government is in the process. So that board actually is, it's not really a regulatory authority, but that board has a lot of powers when it comes to data protection. And I imagine that a lot of penalties, fines, etc., and all the arbitration relating to data privacy litigation might actually be going to the board. So this board should come into place in next few months. That's what we are gathering. But as an organization, if you are appointing you will have to appoint somebody as a consent manager, and you have to register this consent manager with the Data Privacy Board of India. You can choose to nominate your own employee as a consent manager, but consent management is actually a humongous activity. So there are a lot of third-party vendors which are coming up who you can engage as your consent manager. Then there's a very interesting aspect which is called legitimate use. So when we are collecting data, we need to give a notice, we need to give a choice. But there are specific categories where we are not required to get into that aspect. For example, so they are called legitimate use. For example, if you are applying as an employee to my organization, my bank, let's say Prashant's bank, then of course I don't need to give you a notice and choice because your job application is actually a legitimate use. Then if you're applying for some Jan Dhan Yojana or some beneficiary, beneficiary scheme or some subsidy, this notice and choice is not applicable. Then if it's a matter under a court and you have to give some deposition, then you don't have to get into this because it's required for law enforcement. Then also for national security, if you're giving anything, it's always considered as legitimate use. Also in medical emergency or in pandemics, if you have to, share somebody's mobile number and address, you don't need to be going and, bothering about privacy. You just, act the way you are supposed to in those situations. So this is basically a quick summary of the Data Protection Act, its key provisions. So again, if we look at it, I'll just explain the Act and some requirements in a little more detail. So if you look at the extreme left, so there is a category called significant data fiduciary. So what happens is not all organizations are processing the data with an equal scale and magnitude. So what the government is saying is that the organizations which are processing data either in large volume or they're processing very sensitive type of data, they are going to get classified as significant data fiduciary. The other organizations which are small, if you are a small boutique shop, you have 10 people and you're just delivering flowers to people in your community, then I don't think you will fall into the significant data fiduciary. The requirement is that if you are classified as a significant data fiduciary, then you will have to appoint a data protection officer because the game becomes more serious. So that's where, there's a huge requirement which is coming in terms of, finding data protection officers. And of course, we also spoke about there's a massive requirement which is coming in for consent manager. These significant data fiduciaries, they need to, of course, appoint the DPO. They will also have to appoint an independent auditor for the data they are processing. Then, in addition to that, they will have to do a data privacy impact assessment. So right now we are all waiting to see that what should be the frequency at which the audit of data and the DPIA should be done. So what is happening is, while the government has made the DPDB as an act, but the act pretty much is in effect. But what the government said was that we will come out with specific rules which will give you more clarity in terms of implementing the requirement of this act. And as we speak, our government is writing down those rules, and those rules will give us more clarity. We are expecting, I think the Minister of State has said that the rules should come out very soon. We hear that they might come out in a month. Some people say it might take a little more time. So everybody is eagerly awaiting for those rules to come in, because that will give us more clarity in terms of how should we steer the path with respect to the interpretation and implementation of this act. I think we covered most of this. There's always a question which comes in that how much time do you have to comply to this act? And right now the government has officially not come out and said that how much time they're giving to the significant data fiduciaries and to the other organizations to comply. There's always a discussion. Some people are saying that, okay, we'll all be given 6 months. Some people are saying we'll be given more time. But right now, it is anybody's guess how much time the government will give to us to comply to this act. But if you go by typical experience with respect to the other acts, etc., I think government will always be reasonable in terms of giving us timelines to comply. Personally, I have a feeling that they might give more aggressive timelines to the significant data fiduciaries, and others might get a little bit of additional time. So now let's come to the impact onto the banking sector. And I'll try to simplify this a little bit. So if you are a bank, and so let's look at a typical life cycle of a bank. So we are in the business of onboarding people or clients through sales process. Then we do business with them in terms of the deposits, the loans, we sell them cards, we sell them investment products, and then we do customer service. And then we of course do a lot of offshore or the branch remittances, and then we of course have a call center. If you look at it in the entire life cycle of a banking business, data is the oil. So we are collecting customer name, customer contact detail, the age, the gender. We are collecting their KYC documents, photographs, biometrics. We are taking transaction data. Of course, there's a biometric verification which is happening. There's a video verification which is happening. Then we have bank statements, salary slips, account statements, credit information. As banks, we are allowed to ask the religion and caste. I don't know why, but still that information we are collecting. Check number, signature. You look at it, the entire banking business is so much rich in terms of the personal data which is getting collected. And the entire life cycle or the entire spectrum of the banking business actually gets impacted with this. So the upper rectangle is actually about the data of the customers which a bank is collecting. But let's also not forget the lower rectangle, which is the support units. So let's say when you're working with a bank, as an employee of the bank, you're submitting your personal details, your Aadhaar, your KYC, your home address, and so much additional personal data as an employee of the bank you're providing to your employer. Even that data is actually in the scope of this regulation. Then, not to forget, you're also interacting with third-party vendors. And a lot of times you take data from third-party vendors to run your ad campaigns, etc. That data is in scope. And then there is another aspect. You will engage third-party processors. And those third-party processors are also in scope of this Data Protection Act. So net-net, the entire act impacts the banking setup in a material way. So if you look at it, what is the impact which comes in? And if you look at the core processes, so your customer onboarding KYC is straight on impacted because all your processing is personal data. Then if you're doing cross-selling and marketing, of course that's run on the back of analytics, deep analytics, and again personal data is coming into space. You're using a lot of payment ecosystem, you're using account aggregators, totally impacted with this act. Then the entire business of the payments and remittances again is so much rich when it comes to the personal data. It is impacted. And of course, when you're doing wealth management business where you're dealing with high net worth individuals, again personal data. And last but not the least is your call center or your customer service center. Again, that business is totally impacted. So in other words, there isn't a section in a bank which is not impacted with this act. And that is why there is so much, let's say, anxiety in the broader banking setup that how much time the government is going to give to the banks to comply with this act. Because the penalty is huge, and banks being one of the most, let's say, obedient organizations in the country, they are very keen in terms of compliance with this act. There's another interesting aspect which comes in. There are other regulations which are other regulations which are applicable to the banking segment. RBI has also issued a lot of circulars. So, for example, there is a circular from RBI on data localization. So whenever there is a conflict, I don't think there is a conflict coming into any of these regulations or circulars, but it is very clear that the banks have to comply with this act, and they have to comply with all other act and circulars when it comes to data, specifically data localization, which is another key activity which is happening in banks. So then our country is very rich in terms of having the captives or global capability centers, or GCCs as the NASSCOM calls them. I'll just take a few minutes to elaborate what is the impact of this act on the GCC segment. Any of you working in a GCC over here, like Standard Chartered, Deutsche Bank? Okay, 1, 2. So there are a few people in this audience who are working in the GCCs. So net, what the government has said is that as a GCC, you're processing data of another country which has been offshored to you. That data is out of scope of this act. So that actually simplifies your core business process of providing services to a US or a European or a Asia Pacific organization. However, as a GCC, your company is collecting your personal data as employees, your medical details, so on and so forth. All that data, which is basically the employee data, is in scope when it comes to the Data Protection Act applicability on a GCC. So essentially, the employee data is in scope. If you're dealing with supplier third parties, of course they come into this scope. And some of the GCCs in India, they also process the data of their Indian parent entity. For example, HSBC has a huge GCC in India. As per newspaper, they have some 50,000 people. And they also process data of the HSBC branch in India. So that aspect of the data, which is the HSBC branch in India, which is serving to Indian principals, that aspect, that piece of the data is actually in scope at the GCC of HSBC. If you look at the impact on the insurance segment, so just one quick minute in terms of what all is the data touch point when it comes to an insurance organization. So, of course, broadly the insurance industry is into life and non-life. So non-life is your cars, your houses and everything else. And in the life also, a lot of data with respect to the health and other aspect is actually covered. So broadly, the insurance industry is very data rich because the entire actuarial science works on the principles of data analysis. So the insurance companies will collect data on lead generation, which is again, the customer, your location, the health, the age, any other background profile, credit score, etc. They will get medical data. Then when they're doing the policy issuance, they are collecting your data on your payment, nominee, your, whoever will be the beneficiary of this nominee again, your contact information. Then when you're making a claim, the data goes in for policy number, contact detail, KYC detail, etc. And then of course, there are intermediaries which are involved because sometimes insurance companies are not selling directly to you. They use those channel agents or the intermediaries. And then of course, insurance companies also have employees, I realized. So they're collecting employee data and they're also collecting the vendor data. So net, of course, the insurance segment runs on data again as an oil, and there's a massive impact on that segment itself. So if you look at it, of course, the entire insurance industry gets impacted with this. And if you have to look at the core processes, the sales onboarding is impacted because you're in the insurance business as part of sales, all you do is collect a lot of information. Now this part is very special when it comes to the insurance industry, which is the medical underwriting. Because when you are buying health insurance, there's so much of health data which you are providing. That's like very sensitive type of data which goes out. Then there is InsurTech which has come in, and it's a very successful segment in India. Again, they are rich in terms of collecting all types of data. Reinsurance, KYC processing, agents, intermediaries, all of them pretty much are part of this scope. So again, if I have to summarize, on the insurance industry, there isn't an aspect of an insurance business which is not impacted. If you look at payments, very quickly, in the payments industry, the touch point of data, if you look at it, as an acquirer, they're onboarding the merchants, they are doing transaction clearance. In both aspects, again, as a merchant onboarder or a payment network clearing transactions, all you're dealing with data. And in this case, the data is, the credit card number, the name, the mobile number, the email ID, the UPI handle, etc. And again, as a network, if you're a payment network and you're into the authorization business, you're getting the personal account number, you're getting the card number, you're getting the CVV or the PIN, you're getting the card expiry date. And if you're a payment service provider, again, you are into the business of, if you're acquiring data, clients, you're getting the personal data. If you're processing the loyalty and rewards, again, to give credit card miles, so on and so forth, you're collecting all the data. Net, if you're running marketing promotions, again, you're acquiring data. So again, this industry, if you're into the payments business, you're totally impacted with this regulation. So there is a lot of complexity which is coming in. And when I talk to a lot of clients, there's a good discussion in terms of how to go about it. And always keep in mind that the act has been passed by the president, ratified by the president as they call it. We are all awaiting for the rules to come in. They should come in soon. We are also waiting for the Data Protection Board of India to be constituted. But it's always good to start with your implementation journey. And the first thing, and this is what we also learned from the GDPR implementations, is don't jump straight into the implementation. because of course there is a lot of anxiety, etc. I would suggest sit down, take a stock, and figure out your privacy and security strategy. Because there is no ways you can achieve so much of privacy and security controls without aligning your privacy strategy with your security strategy. So, and it will be worth listening to, there are a lot of, professionals in the market who love to talk to you. Listen to people, figure it out what exactly it means. And once you have absorbed what's happening with respect to this regulation, then make up your mind in terms of what do you want to do. And it is always good to write down your data privacy strategy in terms of what are you going to do with respect to this bill. Because the compliance will be a long journey, and it's not that you will comply once. You have to comply once and then you have to maintain compliance posture forever. Then of course, it's always good to sit down and do your current state assessment, which is, okay, what is the data I'm processing? How much of privacy controls I have put in? What is my privacy culture? What is my security posture? That will give you a very broad idea that, okay, how much more work probably has to be done. Then design and document how you're going to approach the entire privacy implementation program. It will be worth writing your privacy policy, some high-level procedures at this stage itself. Then you get into your data mapping. So data mapping, like I was showing you those yellow slides where I was telling that, okay, as part of customer onboarding, what do you do? As part of card processing, what do you do? You need to sit down and do the data mapping at your organization. And it's easy to say data mapping. I think a lot of you are experienced professionals. You know how complex it becomes. So sometimes it's good to do level 1, level 2, and level 3 type of data mapping. Start with level 1, then see if you have to do level 2, and if required, go and do the level 3 data mapping. Don't jump into straight level 3 because data maps, they keep changing and they're evolving forever. Then sit down and do the privacy impact assessment. Basically, at this stage, what we do is we figure out, okay, what is the law, what is the rule, what controls I have put in place, what is the data I am collecting, and then see what is the impact on me if I'm not able to process or handle this data appropriately. That will also give you a list of your gaps and also the implementation controls which you need to deal with. Then you don't forget the third party aspect, because there's a lot of data you're giving to third parties to process, and you have to put in your contractual clauses with the third party that the third party is obligated to you with respect to this data privacy compliance. And you also need to have some recovery mechanism on the third party. You have to put your SLA KPI on the third party also. Then do the implementation, rollout. There's always an audit and the review, and you will not be able to achieve compliance without the privacy enhancing technologies, or the PETs as they are called. So this is how, ladies and gentlemen, your next 12 to 18 months might look like. I'd love to take any questions. I hope I have finished on time. Can somebody circulate the mics?
My name is Sujay. So I work with VUI in Global Information Security. So you just mentioned third-party privacy risk management. So there will be contracts and with third parties. So will there be a chance that the third party becomes another secondary fiduciary and they have the same kind of obligations to the data principle?
See, it depends. For example, let's say I'm collecting. So for example, let's say if I am outsourcing my call center. So as a data fiduciary, I am the one who's, so the company which collects the data is the fiduciary. So as a bank, if I'm collecting your data, I'm the data fiduciary. Now let's say I outsource the call center to you, then you become my data processor. In this case, you do not become the data fiduciary. I will have to put all contractual clauses on you saying that if you leak my data, if you do this, then I'm gonna come after you, I'm gonna sue you, recover the money, will ask 1,000 crore from you as damages, etc. And then I will have to send 15 auditors every month just to check that are you really complying with this. So this is how the third parties are treated.
There are some scenarios where a couple of companies together provide a service. And
yeah, that is, so I'll elaborate what Joy is saying. So for example, There are, let's take an example that LinkedIn will collect a lot of data from you. You are in India, you put your profile on LinkedIn. So we can argue that this law is applicable to LinkedIn. And then to run your hiring campaign, you buy a lot of data from LinkedIn. So in this case, it's a fiduciary to fiduciary transfer. So when you're buying data, with the process of acquiring that data through a purchase, you actually also become a data fiduciary. So in this case, there are two fiduciary for the data. I hope that clarifies.
So in that case, consent also will be like applicable for the second fiduciary?
Yes, the first fiduciary, in this case, LinkedIn has, when they're taking the data, they need to tell that I'm taking your data, Sujoy, and I'm going to sell this to Prashant's bank, and please give me your consent to sell this data. And when I am buying data, I need to check that the person or entity I'm buying the data, have they really given the right notice or right consent? Good question, Sujay. Any more questions? Yeah, go for it. Yes, it's, let's take a call center which is in India. The call center will employ employees which are sitting over here. So the employee data which is collected by the call center is in scope because of this law. But the core business of the call center is like, to handle credit card statements of some American citizens. That aspect of the call center business is not impacted by this law. Thank you. You have to be a little louder. There's some. Yeah, right now, so the question is that, is there any clarification on who becomes a significant data fiduciary? Trust me, you don't want to become a significant data fiduciary because it will impose a lot of obligations on you. Right now, the gut feel is, there is no official statement from government. So this is on a personal opinion basis. So big companies like, let's say, the Ola, the Uber, the SBI, right? All of these companies, they're like big enough, which is a federal bank also if you want. They're big enough to be part of the significant data fiduciary. But we are all awaiting guidelines from the government to see that how will they classify significant data fiduciary. It looks like that if you're processing a lot of data or if you're processing high risk data, which is of importance to the government, you will mostly fall into a significant data fiduciary.